The AFC North is a very competitive division throughout history and especially as of late. All four teams have had a recent playoff berth and all four teams are trying to be competitive once again come 2025. It's a division that always has serious playoff intrigue and should be no different this time around. In this video, I'm going to be going through the division and giving you my predictions for who will win the division, as well as where the other teams will stack up. I've done this a few times already with other divisions in football, and if you're interested, check out my playlist section and you'll find all of those there. Without further ado, thank you for clicking on this video, and I hope you enjoy. Coming in at last place in the division, I have the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are a tricky team for me. Their roster actually isn't awful, and they have a few stars on both sides of the ball that are intriguing. But overall, the pieces have just never came together. The future looked bright after a playoff berth in 2020 and another one in 2023, but things truly fell apart in 2024. Obviously, we all know about the horrible contract situation with Deshaun Watson, which I talked about in more detail on this channel already, but it is the biggest reason for their failures. Watson's contract wouldn't be a big problem if he was even playing halfway decent, but he is genuinely in consideration for the worst current quarterback in the NFL right now. I doubt he'll even be the week one starter, as Joe Flacco has emerged as the new favorite for that position, and the Browns drafted not one but two quarterbacks, so it's clear they've lost all faith in Deshaun Watson, as they should have. Their offseason was just decent in my opinion, with their draft carrying for the most part. The biggest of their signings is offensive guard Tevin Jenkins, who has trouble staying on the field, but when he is on the field, he is usually a solid enough player and is still pretty young. However, outside of that, they didn't make much of a splash. They brought in defensive tackle Malik Collins, who was recently released by the 49ers. He does have a pretty high pass rush win rate. He's not very stout against the run, though. They also signed former first-round pick Joe Tryon from Tampa, but he has not lived up to his first-round selection by any means. Their draft, however, was actually pretty decent in my opinion. My only complaint is that they doubled up on two positions, quarterback and running back, when they needed to fill a lot more holes that were glaring. But overall, they ended up with Mason Graham in the first round after a profitable trade down with the Jaguars, where they collected a lot of future draft capital. Graham was easily the best defensive tackle in this draft and should be expected to produce right away. They also ended up with linebacker Carson Schwessinger, who was also easily the best interior linebacker in this class, and once again should be expected to start producing right away. They got Quinshon Judkins in the second and Dylan Sampson in the fourth, and I like both prospects, but I felt as if doubling up on running back and not addressing the offensive line or receiver was a bit questionable. But maybe it's good they got Sampson, as Judkins was just arrested for domestic violence and battery down in Florida, another winning personality to the Cleveland Browns. Overall, I don't think this offseason is enough to turn around a team that just went 3-14 last year. Maybe they get a little bit better without Deshaun Watson at starting quarterback and some breakout rookies on defense. If Jerry Jeudy can stay healthy offensively and Myles Garrett can continue to produce defensively, I think they could possibly win 5 or 6 games this year. I think I'm going to have the Browns at 5-12 with a generous ceiling of 8-9 and a floor of 3-14. Coming in at third place, once again, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. This decision took me a very long time to come to. Between them and the Steelers, it is razor close. It could go either way easily, and I would not be surprised at all. The reason why I settled on the Bengals here over the Steelers is because the Bengals offseason was just flat out not that good. They made absolutely no splash in free agency other than re-signing the already rostered T. Higgins. Their biggest move, I guess, would be signing TJ Slayton from the Packers after a pretty solid season there in Green Bay, and he may be able to produce in this defense as it lacked a huge hole up the middle last year, but other than that, there just isn't enough to like about this defense. I would love to put them higher, as Joe Burrow is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the NFL right now, but even he had the best statistical season of his career by a long mile, and so did Jamar Chase, and they still finished 9-8. The bottom line is this defense is just bad, and they really did nothing to change it. They drafted edge rusher Shamar Stewart in the first round, who was already a questionable selection in my opinion, as he's a huge project of a player, and the Bengals need production right away. But regardless of that, Stewart is literally holding out of his rookie contract. The Bengals are trying to gain the ability to void out any guaranteed money from his rookie deal, and Stewart is not comfortable with that, as literally no other rookie has to deal with that but him. But regardless, he may or may not even be available for week 1, and he's missing valuable development time in training camp. In the second round, they selected linebacker Demetrius Knight Jr. from South Carolina, which it's an okay selection, I guess, but he really wasn't one of my favorite interior linebackers in this draft, and I much preferred Chris Paul Jr. from Ole Miss, who was still on the board. They then totally reached on Dylan Fairchild in the third round, when most publications had him graded in the 4th or 5th. The only selection I really liked was Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, and that's just because of the value they got him at. Overall, this offense is ready to compete for a Super Bowl tomorrow if they wanted to. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, and an offensive line that performed at least a little bit better than previous years. It's their defense that completely tanks this team for me, and they really didn't do enough to address any of the holes on that side of the ball when that should have been their first priority. This offense is still so elite, and I think Burrow can lead them to a 10-7 season with a ceiling of 11-6 and a floor of 6-11. At number 2 in the runner-up in the North, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, this team was razor close with the Bengals for me, and the only thing that really separated the two was the offseason. The Steelers had an undeniably better offseason than the Bengals did, and they already finished a game better than them last year, while also splitting the series with them during the regular season. Over this offseason period, the Steelers actually made some pretty huge moves. They kicked it off by signing Super Bowl champion and All-Pro corner Darius Slay to a 1-year deal worth $10 million. They needed help in the secondary, and this adds a great veteran presence and a great mentor for the developing Joey Porter Jr. on the other side of him. They also traded for Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf, adding a massive target in the passing game and a receiver who has put up 3 1,000-yard seasons so far in his young career. And then obviously the most noticeable signing but being quarterback Aaron Rodgers. I did 2 whole videos on Rodgers already, so if you want a full breakdown, check those out. But overall, I think Rodgers still has some juice left and is behind a much better offensive line and has a far better coaching staff to work with than he ever had in New York. And it never hurts to have a future Hall of Famer calling the shots under center. With their positives, there were negatives though. They traded George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys so they won't have to pay him that contract extension next season, but now it leaves a hole next to DK, which they're hoping can be filled by the production of their tight ends or Calvin Austin. They also traded their star safety Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Miami Dolphins for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, which was an interesting deal to say the least. I understand that Minkah had a down year last year and didn't play to the level expected from him, but he's only 28 years old and has been so consistently good in the black and gold for a few years now. And to trade him for Jalen Ramsey, who they plan on moving to safety, is kind of ridiculous to me. They plan on moving him to free safety, which makes literally no sense to me, as he might be a solid fit for safety, but you're basically betting on him being at the same level as Minkah Fitzpatrick or better, which I think is very unlikely for a 31-year-old corner who has never played the position before. Regardless, I do like the addition of Jonnu Smith, and he may actually be a reliable target for Aaron Rodgers and a solid number 2 option to DK. That trade as a whole was a bit confusing to me. Their draft, however, was pretty decent. They brought in defensive tackle Derek Harmon in the first round, who I wasn't super high on, but I think he'll be a great fit in the Pittsburgh scheme. Also, adding Caleb Johnson and Jack Sawyer were great value selections, and both have potential to impact right away. All in all, this team is a hard one to grade out, but I think I'm going to settle on an 11-6 record with a 12-5 ceiling and a 7-10 floor. And finally, the winner of the AFC North, I have the Baltimore Ravens taking the division once again. The team is just overall the best team in this division, and frankly, one of the best teams in the entire NFL. I already predicted them to get the Super Bowl in 2026, and I stand by that here. There's no real hole on this team, and everyone plays up to their standard. They went 12-5 last year, and I think they have potential to do even better than that this year. They have MVP candidate and my personal favorite quarterback in the NFL, Lamar Jackson, leading the way. In my opinion, he is the best quarterback playing right now, and when you have a player like that, you're always going to be competitive. The roster was already loaded last year, and their offseason wasn't super flashy, but it didn't need to be. They added depth and also signed wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Chiefs. Hopkins may not Hopkins may not play to the level he was playing at in Houston and Arizona anymore, but he's always a dangerous wide receiver and threat for any defensive coordinator with really good route running and some of the best hands in the NFL. Also, late in the offseason, picking up Jair Alexander is a massive get for them. If Alexander can stay healthy, he's one of the game's best corners, and they got him at a super cheap deal since Lamar was his college teammate at Louisville. Their draft was also really successful in my opinion. They got 2 steals and Malachi Starks at the very back end of the first round, and then landing edge rusher Mike Green in the second round, as he was projected to even go as high as top 15 by some. Overall, the team got a little bit better over the offseason, and they were already a Super Bowl threat last year. I see this team at a record of 13-4 with a ceiling of 15-2 and a floor of 10-7. Thanks for watching.